We are surrounded by data, but just because we've become proficient at collecting it doesn't mean we're good at understanding it or using it to its full advantage. How do you know if your company is reading data correctly? What should you be doing differently to make the most of it? To answer that question, we'll be speaking to Arnaud Petriolle, the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Finance at Xero in the UK. Arnaud has a background in finance, strategy, and consulting, and finds himself at the intersection of finance, go-to-market strategy, and data. So he's well positioned to help us with this timely question. Let's get to our conversation. Hi, Arnaud. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we've had a bit of a formal introduction, but what's something that might surprise people about you?
That's a tough one. Well, I think that something that most people don't know about me is that I think based on my accent, a lot of people infer that I'm French, and I like to present myself as French. I actually grew up in France, but I'm actually Belgian. Despite all my attempt at getting the French citizenship, I never managed to. So I'm still that Belgian citizen with actually very little connection to Belgium, unfortunately.
Were you born in Belgium?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Interesting. My assumption was also that you were French.
I know. Yeah, you're not the only one. Common pitfall.
Cool. So getting into our topic today, working as you do at the intersection of finance, go-to-market strategy, and data, when you hear the question, is your company reading data correctly? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think for me, it's less about how much data a company has and more about how clearly data connect to decision. I think that reading data correctly means that you're not just looking at report, but understanding what they implied for next week, next month, next year decision, whether that's pricing, hiring, cash flow. I think that honestly, most company probably track number rather really well. They have system to collect data. They treat the data properly. They have beautiful dashboard to visualize them. But I think that they still often interpret them poorly. You can have an immaculate dashboard and still be flying blind if you don't know how those metrics map to cause and effect and impact your business. So I think that a company reading data correctly is probably one that where data is not just there to inform strategy, but also there to shape it, challenging assumption and helping the team course correct early.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And in terms of what you've seen, how do businesses sometimes misread what the data is actually telling them?
Well, I think that's something that happened like quite often. Probably like a few reasons behind that. I think kind of like working with company all size, there's probably like three recurring traps that I see. The first one is that we tend to focus way too much, I think, on output metrics rather than inputs. I think that company loves tracking things like revenue, conversion, churn, but they all result and they kind of like lagging indicators. They tell you a lot about what's happening, but not really why it's happening. So the real power, I think, is in tracking the input. So, the activities and the behavior that actually drive those outcomes. So, for example, I guess instead of only measuring churn, you could look at leading signal, customer engagement, feature adoption, time to onboard. I think that this tell you what's about to happen, not just what did happen, but also when something happened, like your churn is decreasing, looking at those input metrics is a really good way to try to investigate what is happening. Probably like another pitfall that I see a lot is quite often we tend to use data as a shield for inaction. I think in my experience, quite often you will hear leaders, managers say, hey, I need this one more data point before I can make a decision. And then you bring the data point and they need another one. So I think that often this is just hesitation dressed up as rigor. I think that, yeah, I mean, good decision, that's fair. They need data. I think that great decision also require a part of judgment. And I think that we need to accept that, we all operate and move forward in a very ambiguous environment. We'll never have 100% of the information that we need to make a decision, but um, waiting too long might actually cost momentum. I think probably a third issue that I see a lot is that, and this one is probably like very natural, but we tend to confuse correlation and causation. I think it's incredibly common to see teams connect two moving line on the chart going into the same direction and assume that one is causing the other. Um, Sales goes up after a marketing campaign, so they credit the campaign, but maybe demand was already seasonal, or a competitor dropped out. So I think that overall data should definitely like be used to guide decision, but it should not dictate them. And I think that the best leader really treat data as a conversation partner, so something that you can use to challenge your assumption, but definitely not something that you use to hide behind them.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Quite a few things there, making sure that you're not only looking at the outcome, you're not only looking retrospectively, you're trying to kind of be proactive with the way that you look at data, but then also not only basing your decisions on data and making sure you have every single point, because if you spend so much time looking at it, you might actually be too slow to make that decision.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I mean, especially now with the emergence of AI, I mean, we live in a world where everything is moving so fast that like you can't take the risk to remaining static because you're not able to make decisions. So data is definitely like a good tool to help us like inform some of the decisions we make, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be something that slow us down.
Yeah, makes sense. Why do you think so many teams, even data literate ones, struggle to interpret their financial and operational data correctly?
Yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, I think that no one is really able to prevent from basically interpreting data incorrectly. I think it's probably a couple of reasons. There's a lot of there's a lot about like too much surface and maybe like not enough structure. I think that, as I was saying, um, dashboard often summarize what happened, but not why, and therefore the whys led to the interpretation of the 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 finance professional or the data scientist. And I think it's pretty easy basically to be impacted by, I think, confirmation bias. I think the way I look at it is that truth is we rarely look at data in a very or in a completely neutral way. I think when we're trying to tackle or understand a business problem, um, you know, my sales are down or my churn is high, we usually start with a set of hypotheses or assumption, and then we use data to try to confirm or invalidate those hypotheses. But I think this is also where bias creeps in.
Mm.
When the numbers appear to support what we already believe, um, this is where we tend to stop questioning those numbers. I think it's a classic case of like confirmation bias, seeing what we expect, but not what's really there. So, for example, um, imagine you increase your performance marketing spend in August, and the next month's volume rise by 10%. Well, great, it worked. Well, does it really? If you had checked last year data, you would have seen that the volume over the same period of time increased not by 10 but 12%, and without any marketing spend. So, here, despite the initial, assessment that you got from your initial data, the investment here was probably not as accretive for the business as you anticipated. So I think, yeah, again, it's a reminder that data, I think, doesn't speak for itself. Interpretation does. I think that without context, yeah, we can easily mistake coincidence for cause.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That especially if you are hoping, say, that your new marketing campaign is going to bring in a lot of sales, if you see that your sales have increased, you're kind of hoping that that is the cause, but you should be looking at what else was going on around that same time.
Yeah, exactly. I think, again, you're never going to get like, a 100% certainty on the answer that you're providing. So there's also a question around like, when should you stop investigating whether or not like, I'm interpreting the data correctly. But again, I think that's also like a lot about judgment and probably something that comes with experience as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it can go back to your experience.
Exactly.
So how can misreading data affect go-to-market decisions such as pricing, product positioning, or customer segmentation?
Um, yeah, I think, look, massively. Take pricing, for example. I think that one on-demand video platform that I worked with when I was a consultant back in the days thought that discounts were driving volume. And while they were technically right, the more they were discounting the product, the more volume they were, or the more traction they were generating. But when analyzed the data properly, adjusting for customer type, retention, um, you realize that the discounted cohort first converted on lower T plans. And on top of that, they were churning 30% faster than
Oh,
discounted
wow.
customer. Um, so yeah, that's one example. I think on another one on segmentation, I think that many firms, I think that's a common pitfall in sales, but I think that many companies group customer by revenue, or they segment the customer base by revenue, and they split them like top customer, medium size, and then small businesses. Um, but when we actually reclassify or resegment those customer based on contribution margin, quite often the so-called top clients category turn out to be the least profitable category as well. So yeah, I think that if you misread your data, at the end of the day, you misallocate your efforts. Here, you might be focusing on those top customers that actually drive a lot of volume, but not that much value for your business. And basically misallocating efforts, honestly, especially in a world of like constrained financial resources, it's honestly the recipe for a deadly GTM.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think you have to be quite careful about how you are choosing to segment your customer base.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is again like a question of like drilling behind what the data is showing you. Quite often we just like remain like on the surface, like that kind of point out to the point I was making earlier. I think that's, yeah, it's very important to kind of like drill behind the what and try to understand the why behind it.
Do you have any tips on how people can try to get to the why behind it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I think it comes a lot with like discipline and just kind of like keeping up. Something that I like to do is that I like to play the devil advocates for myself, basically. And so when I come up with like, oh, it seems the data is showing me that, like, what is someone that is like very challenging would like tell me in meeting? Like, how would I basically like trying to anticipate all the question, all the pitfall in my analysis? And I think that, having that discipline of like, playing the devil advocate for yourself, you will like come up with like, more drill down and more analysis that you want to do just to make sure that like your insights, your conclusion are basically rock solid.
Oh, that sounds like a great tip. In your role, how do you make sure that data drives the right kind of decisions, not just more dashboards and reports?
Um, yeah, I think I try to always start with the question, what decision will this metric inform? I think it's really easy to just, you know, get like to a point where you get deaths by KPI or deaths by data. I think that making sure that every single metrics that you track relates to, a decision that you can take on the back of it. So, for example, I think that if you're tracking churn, for instance, the real business decision is not really, oh, how is my churn pacing this month? It's more like who is churning and why they're churning. That's really something that we can take an action on the back of. And so I think that this is why building a driver-based budget is so important, because that really helps you understand how you're performing at a much detailed level, and assess the next course of action. Um, every metrics I track at Xero has an owner, a cadence, a trigger, and therefore, if my volumes drop by 5%, I already know what next steps are, whether it's like a sales efficiency review or marketing mix assessment. And I think being able to like make sure that every single metrics that you track can lead to, a next course of action is probably the right way to make sure that like you're not just creating dashboard for the sake of it.
Yeah, very good advice. How can finance leaders help the wider business to understand the story behind the numbers so that they can turn data into insights?
Yeah, but I think that the real shift for finance leader is really like moving from reporting to translating meaning. I think that most team already have numbers. Like even team that are not like that data driven will have a couple of dashboard to try to track the performance. I think that what they really lack is the narrative behind it. So, and I think that for that, finance is probably like uniquely positioned to connect the dots across the business. But I think that too often um, we tend to stop at, oh, here is what happened, instead of here was what it means for you uh, and what we should do next. So the way I like to think about it is that finance leaders should act a bit like a journalist. So they kind of like turn data into stories that people can understand and then act on. So they explain the why behind the what, and link, as I was saying, metrics to decision, metrics to business levers, um, and show how teams, well, how the action that the teams are taking are actually driving results and impacting the business. So I think, for example, rather than saying, oh, look, I mean, margin dropped 2 point, you can say margin dropped because our product mix shifted towards low price Q. Uh, but that created like 5,000 new customer trials. So here is how we can convert them a bit more profitably. So I think that ultimately, the job of finance professional, not just leaders, isn't to deliver report anymore. And I think that's especially the case in a world where AI is taking like such a big place in like business environment. I think it's more to create understanding. So when the wider business starts seeing numbers as part of their own stories, not someone else, I think this is really when decisions get better and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really helps to see the numbers as part of the story, especially I think for other members of the business who are perhaps not so sort of numerically minded.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been in so many meetings. We start the meeting with like, a huge data table, and well, half of the half of the audience first like, doesn't understand like, 90% of the metrics in there. And on top of that, for the metrics that they understand, like they don't have like good clarity of what the so what is. So I think that's really where basically finance professional comes in handy and can support.
So you touched a little bit on AI. What role do you see technology playing in helping companies to read their data more accurately? And how do you see AI getting involved?
Um, Yeah, that's a very topical question. Look, I think generally technology is a massive enabler, but only when it's set up to serve clarity instead of complexity, I would say. Um, I think accounting and analytics tool are fantastic at removing noise. They automate the mechanics, they connect system, they make sure that everyone is looking at the same source of truth. By the end of the day, software doesn't make a company data-driven. I think that, as I was saying earlier, discipline and rigor really does. I've seen like team with like the best tool in the world still misreading the data because they didn't define what success looked like for them. And I think that the real power of technology is in the structure that it provides, like basically clean data, consistent definition across the business, and basically faster feedback loop. But yeah, when those foundations are in place, suddenly you're not just seeing numbers, you're also seeing like cause and effects in your real time. So for example, like modern accounting platform like Xero, preaching for my company, uh, well, they have made it possible for small businesses to access basically the kind of visibility that used to be reserved for large corporation. Real-time cash flow, integrated payment, instant reconciliation. So I think that the level of immediacy help business owner connect decision today with the outcome that they will drive tomorrow. So I think yes, technology matters, but I don't think it's just or it's about having like more dashboard. It's just like again ensuring that those dashboards, those data, those platform and system kind of like connect to how the business operates and generates revenue. Um, I think in terms of AI, I think more generally how automation is transforming the way we look and use data. Yeah, it's difficult to answer because it's still like a pretty nascent technology. I think honestly, it's probably making life both easier and harder at the same time. Probably easier because AI has taken care of some of the heavy lifting, cleaning data, consolidating, surfacing anomalies in second, basically. So what used to take weeks for like two analysts now almost happen instantly. But I think that it's also harder because the more automation we add, the easier it become to outsource a part of the reflection, basically, or the thinking to a system. And very quickly, some of the issue that we have noticed, actually, to be fair, before even like the emergence of like AI and ChatGPT, um, is that when you use too much of like technology and like data science, sometimes a lot of the outcome that we look at tend to become a bit of a black box. It's easier to ask an analyst to explain like how he came up with, this set of analysis and like came up to this like conclusion. When the data is coming from like, machine learning, a system that basically only like three people across the organization can really understand in detail. I think it's very easy to just like completely rely on a system that no one really understands. So yeah, I think the question for finance professional at the moment is really trying to find a right balance between like, yes, leveraging AI to like, make some of the kind of grounding work faster, easy, more reliable. But I think that we will always need finance professional to interpret those data, and this is something that at least at this stage we can't really hand over to any system or AI agent.
Yeah, definitely. You still need that human who's there to interpret what's going on and why it's happening.
Exactly.
Cool. I'm going to start our little tradition that we have at the end of every episode, which is asking you some rapid fire questions. So you can answer with the first thing that comes to mind. First
Sure.
question is, what's one piece of software you can't live without? I'm going to say except for Xero and Sift.
Yeah, of course. That's a good one. I think that um, my brain intuitively want to answer a spreadsheet. I honestly think that we don't give enough credits to tool like Excel or G Sheet, because I think honestly they're doing like a great job, and probably like the tool that most finance professionals are using maybe 90% of the time. I think a tool that I've been using now for a couple of months, which I really like, is like Notion. This is where I take my note now. This is where I organize my project. So really where like kind of, all my ideas, random thoughts live. And yeah, I think that they're doing a really good job at kind of like keeping the chaos, especially the chaos of my mind, I guess, pretty organized.
I also love Notion. Really great piece of software.
Yeah, it's really good, really user friendly. Yeah, I think they have done a great job.
And what's the best book you've read recently or the best podcast you've listened to?
Um, that's a good one. I read quite a bit of a nonfiction. I think, yeah, I did recently reread Deep Work by Cal Newport, I think. I think it hit differently this time. It's basically not just about focus, but it's really about attention economics. I think the ability to filter noise and concentrate deeply, uh, especially with like social network and all the technology that and the information that we are surrounded by, is becoming more and more real competitive advantage. So yeah, I think that it's definitely some book that you can reread like every kind of like couple of years, and it feels that you always learn something like different about yourself. And despite like how fast the world is changing at the moment, it feels that they have been pretty relevant, at least to me so far.
Oh, very cool. I must definitely add that to my list of books.
Yeah, really good one.
And if someone hasn't really been paying attention, they've been distracted by all the other things, and they only take away one thing from today's episode, what would you want them to take away?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for staying at least until the end of the podcast. Look, I think for me, the kind of like key takeaway is that the goal isn't to collect more data, it's to make better decision. So I think that data only creates value when it changes behavior. So you can have the perfect dashboard, but if they don't lead to different action, they're basically just cosmetic. So I think that the best companies that I've seen, they don't obsess over having every data point possible. They obsess over clarity. So which are the few metrics that we could track, truly drive the business, who owns them, and what happened when they move. So I think if there's one takeaway, it's really this, like, don't try to read all the data, learn to read the data right, ask better question about it. And I guess also have the courage to act on what the data tells you.
Fantastic, a really great takeaway. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Arnaud.
All right, thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Awesome, and thank you to everyone who has been watching or listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.